In the interest of time here, let me get right into our session. It is my privilege this afternoon to be able to moderate the session on terrorist negotiations, both the Israeli and the American perspectives, and our focus really this afternoon is going to be on political hostage taking. That can occur in a variety of forms, but we're going to be looking both at the issue of terrorist hostage taking, that is, hostages held by non-government groups, and we're going to be looking at the recently increasing phenomenon of what are referred to as wrongful detentions or arbitrary detentions, and that is individuals who are detained by governments for whatever reasons initially, but then obviously are turned into pawns or hostages that are used to support coercive diplomacy, obtaining concessions in some form. No two nations have more experience in dealing with hostage-taking than Israel and the United States. The major wars in Israel's first 25 years of existence saw routine prisoner exchanges after each round of armed conflict, and of course holding Jews for ransom is something that goes back many centuries. In the late 1960s, terrorist hijackings of airliners, kidnappings of individuals, often government officials, diplomats, or barricading themselves with hostages in buildings, in embassies, in schools, and parliaments and other facilities became increasingly common. And of course, we recall that it was just 1 week ago, 50 years, and 1 week ago, that members of the Black September organization, a terrorist organization, took members of the Israeli athletic team hostage at the Munich Olympics in 1972. That episode, which ended tragically, was watched by millions of people worldwide on live television and fundamentally changed how we looked at terrorism in our contemporary world. As a result of these developments, traditional exchanges of prisoners turned into often lengthy negotiations with non-government groups. Now, as I say, we're also going to be looking at the issue of wrongful detentions, and this is not a new component of statecraft. One can find examples of hostages being held by rulers. This goes back into ancient times. In fact, it was a common feature of ancient Persian statecraft, and I mention that specifically because if we look at the serial detainers, I should say, in countries today, the majority of the incidents are carried out by a relatively small number of countries. So, and Iran heads that list. Others include Turkey after the attempted coup, North Korea, China, Russia, and as I say, a list of top detainers. Now, to look at the trends and to talk about the challenges that they pose for government and how we try to deal with them, we have three exceptionally experienced practitioners. To my immediate left, Colonel Lotan, a former Special Forces commander, one of the world's foremost authorities on hostage negotiations. He was, from 2014 to 2016, 17, the Prime Minister of Israel's national coordinator for hostage affairs. We have next Ambassador Roger Carstens, also a former Special Forces commander and more recently a professional diplomat who currently serves in the United States as the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, sometimes referred to as SPEHA, and we'll learn more about that in a moment. And then we have, at the end of the row here, Chris O'Leary, a senior FBI officer, a veteran of the FBI's Counter-Terrorism Task Force, and the man who currently is the head of what we call the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, which is responsible for coordinating all of our activities and efforts in terms of the return, getting the return of the hostages. That is, bringing together the FBI, the military, and so on. So let me since I mentioned SPEHA and promised to get right back to that, let me start with you, Ambassador Carstens. Why was SPEHA, this special office, created, and what exactly do you do?
Okay, I hope this works. Can everyone hear me? Okay, victory. First off, I'd like to thank the people who've put this conference together, ICT, wonderful job bringing all these professionals into this organization, into these spaces to talk about the various topics that we've had a chance to review today and over the past few days. Secondly, I'd like to thank Brian. Thanks for bringing us on this panel. Thanks for hosting and moderating. You are the expert in the field, in a field that doesn't have much research yet. We're grateful for the efforts that you put into researching this topic. And thanks also for just bringing us together today. And even to my good friend Chris and my good friend Lior, it's an honor to be sitting between you today. But to get to the question, in 2015, after a series of hostage-related failures that took place in Syria, President Obama ordered an interagency review of the United States' capability to conduct hostage recovery operations. Now, this review showed that we had many flaws, and he tried to rectify that by issuing Executive Order 13698 and Presidential Policy Directive 30, or we call it PPD 30, which created what we might call the hostage recovery enterprise within the United States government. Now, of the three entities, as Brian mentioned, I'm with a group called SPEHA. We're housed within the Department of State, and our job is to coordinate and lead diplomatic negotiations to bring hostages home. The other organization is led by my good friend here, Chris O'Leary. It's the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, housed at the FBI. Don't want to steal your thunder, so we'll let you talk about your organization. And then the Hostage Response Group at the National Security Council, an organization that focuses mainly on policy and also convening us all to address a threat. Now, where we were after 2015, we now had the structure, but we were focused pretty much on hostages, Americans taken by non-state actors, be it Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and so forth. Well, in 2020, a law was passed in the United States, the Robert Levinson Hostage Recovery and Hostage Taking Accountability Act, pretty big one. We've shortened that to the Levinson Act. And the Levinson Act not only codified into law our offices and our positions and some of our structures and way of doing business, but it also opened up what we do to wrongful detainees. That's a person that's been taken by a nation state like Russia, China, Iran, etc. It also offered some criteria, 11 criteria, where we can take a look at a case of Americans, say, arrested in China, and by using the criteria, come up with a decision as to whether that person has been taken wrongfully or not. Now, recently, in just this summer, in July of this year, President Biden issued another executive order, which, again, codified some of the advances that we'd made, but also gave us a few more tools to deal with this horrific practice. In this executive order, he made it part of what we do in the government to prioritize the families of those who have been taken hostage or been wrongfully detained. That means we're required to build this non-government relationship, you could almost say, to where we try to reach out to the families, partner with them, keep them informed, let them know what we're doing. It also gave us a sanctioning authority, and the sanctioning authority was provided for in the Levinson Act, but the executive order allowed us to implement it. It also gave us the directive to start working on deterrent strategies. Now, what we've been doing and what, as he mentioned, the Persians have been doing since 4,500 years. If you've read your Thucydides, Herodotus, Xenophon, the Bible, the Iliad, this has been going on for a long time, and yet in 4,500 years of recorded history, we've not really found a way to beat it. And Secretary of State Blinken and the President have made it pretty much an order for us to find ways to deter it, not only using tools that we've never used before, but taking tools that we do have that have never been put into use of deterring hostage taking, and also to build relationships with other countries, multilateral organizations, so that if we do this right, maybe 10 or 15 years from now, we'll take this practice and put it onto the dustbin of history. The last thing the executive order told us to do was to start declassifying information as rapidly as possible so that we can let the families know what we're trying to do to affect their case and kind of keep them into the process. We didn't want to do what we did in 2014 with the cases in Syria and put the hand in their face and say, I'm sorry, it's classified, we can't tell you. Instead, we want to bring the families along. So lastly, I know it's a long answer, but lastly, what we do in my office now, now it's 2022, a few years after the start of this, 7 years into this effort, my organization focuses on bringing Americans home, taking care of their families, and finding ways to deter this horrible practice. So Brian, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. No, with that, I mean, look, that means ultimately in terms of bringing people home, sometimes, especially in dealing with arbitrary detentions, that there's a quid pro quo. There's some sort of an arrangement made to do so. And these can be very controversial. We've seen this both in America and in Israel here as well. So let me go right to you, Lior, and ask you, how do we reconcile the understandable desire and public pressure to bring hostages back, to bring prisoners back, in some cases to bring the remains of prisoners back, and how do we reconcile that with broader national interests? Can those two actually be reconciled?
Thank you, Brian, for your preparation and leadership of this panel. Thank you, ICT, for this great conference. I expected no less from ICT, and for me, this is a line of duty. All of you, it's a real honor to be part of this line of duties. Just some data to back the Israeli perspective. Since 1978, since the first large military campaign in Lebanon that Israel conducted against PLO organization until now, 44 years, non-governmental organization, mainly in Lebanon, PLO, later Hezbollah, and in Gaza Strip, Hamas, held Israeli hostages, civilians, soldiers, or KIA, more than 33 years from this period. About 10 events, among them 11 live hostages, live soldiers, 3 civilians, and 11 bodies of KIAs. These 10 events, all of them, except the open case now in Gaza Strip, ended with an agreement with the organization, the other organization. Within these agreements, Israel, as a general speaking, released about 1,500 security prisoners as a total, sentenced and tried into jail in Israel, more than 5,000 detainees before trials held in Lebanon, and repatriate to the organization about 500 bodies of its soldiers. Now, when I analyze this trend, I can come to a conclusion that the enemy or the other part organization succeeding with their mission. They are holding hostages to release prisoners. And in the other side, my government is again and again dragged into a transaction that forces it to pay more and more in price and quality and seniority of the prisoners. The length of the period of the events are extended. The average now is few years. The demands are increased. The average now is few hundreds for each Israeli POW or MIA. So I'm looking at that and asking myself, either we are operating according to an equation which is efficient or not. For me, and maybe we will elaborate on that later, it's a perfect asymmetric equation where all the advantages are for the other side, the enemy, the organization, and all the disadvantages are for the governments. Now, for your question, I think that the pressures of the families, and I really appreciated what you just mentioned, Ambassador, regarding the logic to open hand, to open data, to open resources, and to start communicate with the families, because it will always be there. This is our perspective, our experience. Of course, the professional point of view is that there needs to be a barrier between the decision maker and the families of the hostages. But practically, like apple pie and motherhood, it's not always there. Practically, the diplomatic layer and the decision maker are always in some pressures of the public. So for me, the question is not how we can breach, how we can stop it. The question is how we can design and operate an efficient enough system and paradigm that will press and leverage the other side, the organization that holding hostages, in much more efficient way than the public opinion and the public pressure is impacting on our government. And I think later on we can elaborate on some notion, ideas about that.
We'll come back to that in a moment. So Chris, let me ask you. You know, historically, we were talking about history all the way back to ancient times, but more recently, the United States in the 1920s and 1930s had a major problem with kidnappings. I mean, we had ransom kidnappings taking place, and that changed dramatically in 1932 with the kidnapping of the Lindbergh child who was killed, and we ended up with new legislation and bringing the FBI into these cases. Since that time, the FBI has had a remarkably successful record in apprehending kidnappers. I mean, ransoms were paid, kidnappers were identified, they were caught, they were convicted, and the penalties were extremely severe. And as a consequence of that, the United States right now, we still have some ransom kidnappings, but this is a comparatively rare crime. That's a success story. So thinking about that in your current position as head of the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, can we replicate that, or how can we attempt to bring that kind of record internationally, which doesn't start with what we will do or not do in terms of ransom or concessions, but starts at the other end, that is apprehension and punishment?
Well, thank you for the question. Number one, it is an honor to be on stage with you. So I got into the terrorism business and the hostage business. I was staged off the coast of Lebanon in 1989, getting ready to go in when U.S. Marine Colonel Higgins was taken by Hezbollah. And I was studying some of the publications that Brian had already put out back then. So it is a real honor to be on stage with you, so it's great. Secondly, Ambassador Carstens and I, usually when we're in front of microphones, we're testifying in front of Congress, so this is much more relaxing, so thank you for having us here. It's a difficult question to answer. We have had remarkable success in the United States, but it is territory we control. And they are laws that we can easily apply. And I know there have been extensive studies on whether concessions work or do not. Our no concession policy that has been somewhat in place since the early 70s has had mixed results over the years. We are limited to what we are allowed to do in engaging a captor network. And it has been our policy as a government to not provide any concessions. Having said that, we do have some latitude to negotiate with the terrorists. And that allows us to operate, to conduct our priority missions, which are first and foremost, I lead the organizations that are seeking to rescue and recover our hostages. It's an interagency component with all of our intelligence agencies and our military special operations all housed under one organization. The second part, which is more to your point, our second priority is to hold the captors responsible for their crimes. And that is we use US laws to do it, There is no expiration on the indictments for most of these cases, and we will pursue them around the world for as long as it takes. The Benghazi attackers who killed our ambassador and 3 other Americans, we have gone in and taken 3 of them so far and brought them back to the United States to face justice. So we continue to do that. The third thing that we also do is we look for closure for the families. So in some of these cases, the hostages die in captivity, and we pursue every lead to use techniques that the FBI has and our intelligence community to find their remains and bring them home to their families. I do think that we should have maximum flexibility in our ability to negotiate and look at creative approaches for concessions, but I do think it needs a deeper study as well.
You know, you mentioned that the record in terms of whether or not making concessions is an effective deterrent. That's a question, and the evidence on that is pretty shaky. At the same time, you mentioned that in looking at the historical record that you're referring to, the cases have increased, the length of negotiations have increased, and the prices have gone up, which suggest, in a sense, or I'm going to infer, that compliance encourages repetition. We're not sure whether non-compliance or no concessions actually is an effective deterrent. Is that a fair way of putting it?
First of all, just as a note, I want to share your respect and admiration that you present to Brian Jenkins here as a researcher, and to express that, of course, and also to my oracle in this business of hostage event, to Professor Murari, which is present here in the first row, who led our national negotiation unit for years and established the foundation for this practice in our country. I'll tell you something, Brian. In the series of classical hostages event during the 70s, about 5 and 6 events that conducted by Palestinian organization, we saw a constant and precise decreasing of the demands, from demanding all the prisoners to 317 in Munich, 200 in Sabena, then 20, then 11. It means that when the government of Israel faced a strong strategy of no concession at all, when it was in our soil, when we had a tactical option, which is not the case, when we have now POW in the outer border, when the government stated that's a strategy, such a strategy, the other organization, I will not say deters, but change its philosophy, its logic, explore the way to be more efficient, and then ask the demand that the government might, in their perception, comply. So it means that a strategy, strong strategy, solid strategy, efficient strategy, impact the other side regarding his consideration, not surely about deterrence or others. Just one more comment regarding your further question. There is always a tense, especially in our experience, when we have a practical military conflict between us and the organization that holding hostages, there is always a tense between the interest to repatriate our guys and other interests, more strategic one. For example, in Gaza now, security stability in Gaza is in the interest of Israel. One of the fundamental components of this interest is the civil affair stability. One of the fundamental components for that is the support of the Israeli government to the Palestinian that living in Gaza Strip. So now here is a tense. How can you leverage those who hold the hostages, but in the other hand, support the population and the communities that living in the same area that under the control of this organization? This is a tense, this is a challenge. I think there are ways to bridge the gap of these challenges.
I don't know what happened to 30 minutes here. They just really roared past, and I'm getting signals. But I'm going to resist the signals for one moment here and ask a final question to Ambassador Carstens. We've been talking about non-government groups and the ability to deter or not deter them. In terms of dealing with states detaining foreign citizens and using it for coercive diplomacy, what can we do to in a sense, alter their cost-benefit calculations? It's not our territory, as Chris has pointed out. We don't have the control of the situation as we would in a barricade hostage situation here in Israel, as Lior has pointed out. What is our arsenal for, in a sense, changing how they view the costs and benefits of doing this?
Great question, because that's exactly what we wrestle with every day, not in just terms of ongoing negotiations, but on where we want to take this. Most of you have some semblance of a military background. You're familiar with the term dime fill: diplomatic, information, military, law enforcement, economics, legal. Everything that you can bring together as a part of your national power should be considered to deter nations from doing this in the future. If we can put some of those tools to bear on a current case, that's good for us. If we can tell people that if they take one of our citizens, they're going to face this, that's even better. If we can get other countries to band with us so that one day in the far future, a citizen of Botswana is taken, and 20, 30, or 40 nations come to the Botswanans and say, we're with you on this. This person was wrongfully detained. It's your citizen. But now how can we all work together, applying our own elements of national power on the country that's taken this citizen? If we can get to that point, then truly, hopefully my office goes away. I go off and do something else. I'm sure I could use a job offer, so please, 15 years from now. But I think we have a chance here to change the world. You know, if we're not learning, the enemy, they learn all the time, even though they're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. It's time to take all that we've learned in the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and flip it on its head and start raising the costs dramatically.
Ambassador Carstens, a great answer. Ambassador Carstens, Mr. O'Leary, Colonel Lotan, thank you very much, and thank all of you for your attention.